final months of World War II, Adolf Hitler's trust in his military commanders began to falter. As Germany's situation worsened, Hitler became more paranoid, questioning the loyalty and competence of those who had once led his panzer divisions to victories. His increasing distrust was fueled by his worsening mental state, leading to constant fits of rage, even against his most loyal officers. This paranoia was so intense that it didn't matter if the generals had been successful in earlier campaigns. Even commanders like Heinz Guderian, the mastermind behind Germany's Blitzkrieg tactics, faced severe consequences. During a meeting in March 1945, Guderian had the courage to challenge Hitler's military strategy. He criticized the lack of artillery preparation for an unsuccessful offensive near Kustrin, prompting a swift reaction from Hitler. Hitler's response was harsh and unforgiving. He immediately relieved Guderian of his post, despite the general's long service and tactical brilliance. The dismissal was not isolated. It was part of a broader pattern of growing frustration and anger towards his military leaders. Those who had once been in Hitler's inner circle were now at risk of losing their positions, regardless of their past successes. Hitler's growing paranoia extended to other high-ranking officers. Gerd von Rundstedt, after the failed Normandy campaign, also faced the Führer's ire. Hitler's actions shattered the once cohesive leadership structure, replacing it with a nest of perceived traitors and incompetence. As Germany's military situation worsened, many generals found themselves struggling with their roles. Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg tactics, was among the first to feel Hitler's wrath. During a meeting in March 1945, Guderian openly criticized Hitler's military strategy, especially the failure to prepare adequately for a key offensive. Guderian's remarks were a direct challenge to Hitler's decisions, leading to his immediate dismissal. Meanwhile, Gerd von Rundstedt, one of Hitler's senior military leaders, also faced the Führer's anger. After the failure of the Normandy campaign, Rundstedt suggested negotiating for peace, a proposal that was quickly rejected by Hitler. This act of defiance sealed his fate. Rundstedt's suggestion to pursue peace was seen as a betrayal and resulted in his fall from favor. At the heart of this turmoil was General Helmuth Weidling, appointed to defend Berlin in the final days of the war. Weidling faced an impossible task, as German forces in Berlin were poorly equipped, outnumbered, and lacking proper supplies. His attempts to hold the city against the advancing Soviet forces were futile, and his efforts were increasingly dismissed by a delusional Hitler. These commanders, who had once been at the forefront of Nazi military strategy, found themselves in impossible situations. The failure of Germany's war efforts led to their downfall, as Hitler's paranoia made them scapegoats for the Reich's inevitable collapse. In the final days of World War II, German generals faced insurmountable challenges. Gotthard Heinrich, tasked with holding the Seelow Heights, fought valiantly to defend against the Soviet forces, but ultimately failed. His attempts were overshadowed by the overwhelming might of the Red Army, leading to a swift collapse of his defenses. Despite his strategic ingenuity, the battle was lost due to the sheer power of the Soviet assault. Similarly, Ferdinand Schörner, one of Hitler's most fanatical followers, made a devastating choice in the war's last days. Faced with certain defeat, Schörner abandoned his post and fled south, leaving his troops behind to face the advancing Soviet forces alone. His act of desertion marked a final betrayal of the very ideals he had once staunchly defended. On the other hand, Walter Model, a man once known for his exceptional defensive tactics, found himself trapped in the Ruhr pocket. As Allied forces closed in, Model's position became increasingly untenable. The lack of resources, combined with the fragmentation of his troops, led to a dire situation. On April 21, 1945, Model, overwhelmed by despair and a sense of betrayal, chose to end his life in a forest near Duisburg. The collapse of the German military was not just a result of external forces, but the disintegration of morale and leadership. The generals who had once commanded powerful armies were now helpless in the face of overwhelming defeat. After World War II, many of Hitler's generals faced uncertain futures. Albert Kesselring, once a prominent commander, was eventually released from custody. Despite being tried for war crimes, he managed to rebuild his life and play a significant role in post-war Germany. Kesselring even published memoirs offering his side of the story and became involved in veterans associations. Another key figure, Erich von Manstein, faced trial for his actions during the war. He was captured by the Allies but later released due to his deteriorating health. Manstein went on to become a key figure in the rebuilding of the West German Army, serving in NATO and providing military advice. His memoirs were published, and he helped historians understand German tactics during the war. Heinz Guderian, after his dismissal from Hitler's command, also turned to writing. As one of the architects of Blitzkrieg, Guderian spent his post-war years reflecting on military strategy and history. His works became essential reading for understanding modern warfare. Despite these men's efforts to rebuild, their fates were shaped by their association with the Nazi regime. While some regained positions of influence, others struggled with their legacy. They were forced to confront the moral and ethical decisions of their wartime actions, and their post-war experiences became a crucial part of Germany's reckoning with its past. After World War II, the generals of the Waffen-SS faced a much harsher fate than their Wehrmacht counterparts. Their direct involvement in atrocities, including the Holocaust and mass executions, meant that they were held responsible for crimes against humanity. Figures like Sepp Dietrich, who led the 1st SS Panzer Division, were specifically targeted for their role in the Malmedy massacre during the Battle of the Bulge, where American prisoners were executed. The trial for Dietrich's involvement in the massacre was a clear demonstration of the harsh justice awaiting Waffen-SS commanders. Despite claims of following orders, the evidence was overwhelming. Dietrich's loyalty to Hitler and his division's brutal tactics ultimately led to his downfall. Other Waffen-SS commanders, like Herbert Otto Geil, avoided immediate execution after the war. Geil, known for his bravery and tactical skills, was captured by the Allies but later released. He spent his post-war years running a bookstore and publishing a magazine for former Waffen-SS members. The post-war fates of these men revealed the complex reality of justice. While some Waffen-SS leaders faced swift retribution for their actions, others were able to blend into civilian life or become involved in veteran organizations. However, their connections to Nazi atrocities would forever shape their legacy, with many struggling to escape the shadow of their involvement in the regime's darkest moments. As the dust settled over Nazi Germany, the Allied powers sought to hold the German leadership accountable. Prominent generals such as Wilhelm Keidel and Alfred Jodl were put on trial at the Nuremberg trials. Both were found guilty of crimes against humanity, particularly for their roles in carrying out Hitler's orders. Keidel's final words, "Alles für Deutschland," everything for Germany, revealed his unwavering loyalty even as he faced the gallows. Along with Keidel and Jodl, Anton Dostler, a lesser-known general, was tried for executing 15 U.S. soldiers in violation of the Geneva Convention. His defense, claiming he was following orders, did not sway the tribunal. Dostler was sentenced to death and executed by firing squad in December 1945. Another key figure, SS General Jürgen Stroop, infamous for his brutal suppression of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, was tried in Poland. Stroop's actions led to the deaths of thousands of Jews, and he was sentenced to death. On March 6, 1952, Stroop was hanged in Warsaw, the city where his crimes had left a devastating mark. These trials were a critical part of the process to bring justice to those responsible for the atrocities of the Nazi regime. They demonstrated that even high-ranking officers were not immune from punishment. The verdicts sent a strong message that actions during the war would have lasting consequences. The legacy of these trials would shape international law and future military ethics. As Allied forces advanced and Nazi Germany crumbled, some high-ranking German officers chose to escape justice. A select group of generals, including Johann Steinhoff, used the notorious rat lines, a secret network of escape routes, to flee to South America. These routes were organized by the shadowy Odessa network, which helped many former Nazis evade capture. Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe officer, sought refuge in Argentina, where he joined other former Nazis who had escaped prosecution. Many of these fugitives lived under false identities, blending in with local communities while hiding their past. They adopted new lives as businessmen, farmers, and laborers, constantly on the lookout for potential capture. One notable example was Walter Roth, a former SS officer responsible for the development of mobile gas chambers. After escaping to Chile, Roth lived there openly for years, despite his dark past. He managed to avoid justice, his crimes largely unpunished until later investigations brought attention to his activities. Despite the safety of their new lives, the fugitive generals lived with constant fear. The capture of Adolf Eichmann in 1960 by Israeli agents sent shockwaves through the community of Nazi war criminals in South America. Eichmann had been living in Buenos Aires under a false identity, and his capture highlighted the ongoing pursuit of Nazi criminals. As the years passed, the number of Nazi fugitives dwindled. Some died peacefully in their new homes, while others were eventually tracked down and brought to trial. The hunt for these men became a lifelong obsession for many, including Simon Wiesenthal. In the aftermath of World War II, some generals sought redemption in their own ways. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus was one of the most notable examples. Paulus, who had famously surrendered to the Soviets at Stalingrad in 1943, had defied Hitler's orders to commit suicide. His surrender marked a significant break from Nazi ideology, and after the war, he became a key witness during the Nuremberg trials. Paulus was initially held by the Soviets, who saw the value in his testimony. He was eventually used by the Soviets to testify against other Nazi leaders, including Hermann Göring. Paulus openly admitted his role in the planning of Operation Barbarossa and acknowledged the criminal nature of the campaign. His willingness to speak out against the Nazi regime marked a sharp departure from his former loyalty. After the Nuremberg trials, Paulus's life took an unexpected turn. Though he was a prisoner for years, he was eventually released by the Soviets in 1953 after Stalin's death. However, his life in post-war Germany was shaped by his decision to side with the Soviet Union during the war. He chose to settle in East Germany, which raised suspicions about his true political loyalties. Paulus's story became a complex one. His post-war life reflected a personal reckoning with his past. Despite his surrender, he was remembered for his role in Nazi military history, and his testimony at Nuremberg added a significant chapter to the process of confronting the war crimes of Nazi Germany. The post-war experiences of the German generals raised complex questions about leadership, duty, and morality. Many of these officers had followed Hitler's orders without questioning the consequences. However, as the war ended and they faced trial or captivity, they were forced to reflect on their actions. The Nuremberg trials, in particular, revealed the moral failures of those who had once commanded vast armies. The generals' involvement in the Nazi regime's atrocities became a key focus in post-war discussions. Many, like Erich von Manstein, tried to justify their actions by claiming they were merely following orders. However, such arguments fell short of exonerating them. The atrocities committed during the war, especially against civilians, were too significant to be overlooked. While some generals, such as Guderian and Kesselring, managed to rebuild their reputations after the war, others faced long-lasting consequences. Their post-war lives often involved grappling with their moral responsibility. The debates surrounding their actions influenced military ethics in the decades that followed. For Germany, the reckoning with its past began with the trials and testimonies of these men. Their stories highlighted the dangers of blind obedience to authority and the importance of moral courage in leadership. In the end, their legacies became cautionary tales, reminding future generations of the dangers posed by unquestioned loyalty and the ethical failures of wartime leadership. As the war ended, the fates of Hitler's generals were sealed in various ways. Some faced execution, others imprisonment, and some were even freed. The Nuremberg trials exposed the deep involvement of top commanders in the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. Men like Wilhelm Keitel and Alfred Jodl were held accountable for their actions during the war, and both were executed for their crimes. Many of the generals found themselves labeled as war criminals. However, the trials were also a turning point in the understanding of military responsibility. The complex relationship between following orders and committing atrocities was laid bare. Erich von Manstein, despite his brilliance as a commander, faced accusations of war crimes. His defense, that atrocities were the work of the SS, was not enough to absolve him of complicity in the suffering caused. While some generals, like Guderian, were able to rehabilitate their reputations through memoirs and historical works, others, such as Ferdinand Schörner, could not escape the shadow of their pasts. The internal divisions among Nazi commanders were apparent, with some choosing defiance, while others sought to distance themselves from the regime's darkest acts. Ultimately, the fate of these generals serves as a stark reminder of the moral consequences of military leadership. Their actions during the war continued to be debated, and their trials became a pivotal moment in establishing international laws on war crimes and military ethics.